economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Joining me today, this week, we're spending some time looking at some of the issues that we address on a regular basis here on Point of View, bringing a number of experts. And in just a few minutes, we're going to be talking with Dr. Merrill Matthews on the subject of health care and Obamacare and repeal and replace, and what does that really look like. And so we'll spend some time with him. In the second hour, we're going to be talking with Tommy Nelson about the 100 Days of Prayer before the inauguration, and something they've instituted, and I think that will be very good. But before we get there, there are some stories I wanted to cover. And yesterday, in the second hour, we spent a little bit of time talking about some of the hostility towards Christianity that even manifests itself during the Christmas season. This was a topic we were going to address Friday, but Kelly Shackelford cannot be with us, so I thought, well, I'll just cover it on Tuesday afternoon. Now, some of you I've not had a chance to hear that program, and one of the things we talked about was at the Patterson Middle School in Killeen, Texas. A woman, Deidre Shannon, actually decorated her office, and it had the Charlie Brown's Christmas, and was told to take that down because it included a verse from Luke 2, chapter 2, verse 11. And we have some new pieces on that story, but given the fact that some of you have not heard that, yesterday, of course, we talked about what happened down there, Todd Starnes. Now it's become kind of a national story, whereas before we were just using it as one of many illustrations. So I thought I'd read just for a minute from the Family Research Council. Tony Perkins and his staff put this together, and it's entitled, "Sorry, Charlie, libs are allergic to these peanuts." They love to turn a phrase here, and it says, Snoopy wasn't the only one in the doghouse at Christmas. So was Texas teacher Deidre Shannon. At Patterson Middle School in Killeen, Shannon did what most of her colleagues do at Christmas. She decorated her classroom. The only problem is she used a poster of Charlie Brown's Christmas. You might say, what's so controversial about that? Well, the scene also happens to include Luke 2, verse 11, the Bible verse, "For unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior who is Christ the Lord," along, of course, with a famous line from Linus, "That's what Christmas is all about, Charlie Brown." Well, as we mentioned yesterday, and this article mentions as well, 2 days later, the principal ordered her to take the poster down, arguing that it was a violation of the so-called separation of church and state. Now, Deidre Shannon was stunned. She said, quote, to Todd Starnes, "People want us to be tolerant of everything, but they don't tolerate Christianity." She went on in the article to say, "Throughout the school, there's a talk about diversity. Well, you aren't being very diverse if you aren't allowing Christians to put up something that refers to a Christian holiday," which, by the way, is a federal holiday. So we talked a little bit about that yesterday, but I didn't have a chance to talk about this piece that has come down, and that is Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton actually notified the school that they're in violation, because it turns out, and I'd forgotten about this, that they had a Merry Christmas law. So basically what he said is no school official in Texas can silence a biblical reference to Christmas. This is an attack, he says, on religious liberty and a violation of the First Amendment and state law. You might say, what's the state law? Well, back in 2013, because we'd had some of these so-called Christmas wars, some of them breaking out in Plano, Texas, where at the originally, that's where Ken Paxton served first as a representative, then later as a state senator. He recognized that this was a need, and so it actually removes legal risks from exchanging holiday greetings in classrooms, and it protects symbols such as Christmas trees, menorahs, and nativity scenes, as long as more than one religion is represented and a secular symbol such as maybe a snowman is displayed, which is, of course, exactly what was happening in the hallways there. So what she had on her door was one of many different ideas. And so you would think, well, then certainly when notified by the Attorney General, of the state of Texas that the school officials would say, oh, my bad, sorry, didn't understand that. That's something we just made a mistake on. No, that's not what they said. I just love this. In a defiant statement from the Killeen Independent School District, it said, quote, our employees are free to celebrate the Christmas and holiday season in a matter of their choosing. Went on to say, however, employees are not permitted to impose their personal beliefs on students, unquote. Didn't see that one coming. You know, so many times when we will talk with Kelly Shackelford on Friday, and we'll talk about how they've notified a school district or elected official about some issue. You most of the time figure that it will go away once they see a demand letter, once they are educated about the issue. But it's amazing how so many times you see some of them dig in their heels. And I think it illustrates the point I was making yesterday, and the point we'll probably come back to even on Friday when we talk about hostility to Christianity. Some will just simply say, no, I'm just trying to protect us from a lawsuit. No, when you actually begin to say, well, no, actually, you are in violation of a state law, or this is not something that is prohibited by the First Amendment or whatever it might be, then they dig in their heels and you begin to realize maybe some of the motives there weren't quite as pure as they were first represented as being. I don't know anything about the people in the Killeen Independent School District, but I can read their statement and see that obviously at least somebody that wrote that kind of digging in their heels and saying, you're not going to tell us what we can tell our teachers and what they can or can't say. And I think, again, our good friends at the Family Research Council ended with this by saying, passing by a poster is not imposing beliefs on anyone. How many messages do Americans walk by every day that are contrary to their personal beliefs? There wouldn't be enough attorneys in the world to litigate all those internal conflicts. It's called free speech. And despite what Killeen officials believe, teachers are entitled to it as well. Asked for a comment by Todd Starnes, the district wrote back, the Killeen Independent School District celebrates and embraces the diverse cultures and values of our students and employees. We remain proud of our diversity and the community which we serve. I love their line. If this is diversity, then the school could use a lesson in vocabulary. So I wanted to bring you up to date on that particular story since we talked about it yesterday in the second hour. I know some of you may listen to a radio station that doesn't carry both hours, or maybe you didn't have a chance to hear it. And in the second hour today, we'll get back to this as we talk with Tommy Nelson. We'll be talking about the importance of prayer, but the fact is what were the Christian founding of this country? Why is it important to pray for the incoming president? How should we have been praying for the current president and his administration, and what are some very important prayer targets for the future? So we'll certainly spend some time talking about that and the story out of Killeen, but I thought it would just give you a little bit of an update and maybe add one more item to the story, and that is the person we're quoting from is the Attorney General of the state of Texas, Ken Paxton. One of the things that I don't know if I've ever shared on the air, but it was actually Kelly Shackelford who many years ago went to Ken Paxton and said, Ken, you were the student body president at Baylor. And of course, Kelly graduated from Baylor Law School. And he said, you know, you really have an ability to communicate, and I really would like to encourage you to run for the state legislature. Ken Paxton came home. His wife said, you know, I've been thinking the very same thing. So he ran first as a representative. Then later he ran as Speaker of the House in the Texas House, did not win, and then became the state senator. And then just a little over a year ago became the Attorney General. And if you think of how important it was for Kelly Shackelford to encourage somebody like Ken Paxton, he's certainly been suing the Obama administration about some of the issues that we're concerned about, but also defending the right of Christians. We need to get Ken Paxton back in here again just to talk about some of that. But we need to take a break. When we come back, we're going to move to the issue of healthcare reform with Dr. Merrill Matthews. Stay tuned. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, the CEOs of major corporations may be smart people when it comes to business, but many of them apparently do not know when to keep their comments to themselves about the 2016 presidential election. Their public rants against Donald Trump's election and their criticism of voters isn't likely to encourage people to buy their products. Matt Maloney is the CEO of Grubhub. The company offers takeout, but often seems more intent in telling its conservative employees to get out. After criticizing the president-elect and the people who voted for him, he concluded, "If you do not agree with this statement, then please reply to this email with your resignation, because you have no place here. We do not tolerate hateful attitudes on our team." Bill Penzi of Penzi Spices went on a rant about Donald Trump and then concluded with a pointed comment to anyone who was stupid enough to vote for him. He said, "You really are a good bunch, but you just committed the biggest act of racism in American history since Wallace stood at the schoolhouse doorway 53 years ago." The company to join these ranks is the Kellogg's Company. It recently announced its decision to pull ads from the conservative media giant Breitbart.com. The company executives argued that the 45 million monthly conservative readers of Breitbart are not aligned with our values as a company. Breitbart responded by explaining that they are fearless advocates for traditional American values. Perhaps the most important among these is freedom of speech. They also launched a Dump Kellogg's petition and called for a boycott of Kellogg's cereals, Eggos, Pringles, and other brands. As I've said in previous commentaries, it would be wise for businesses and corporations to stop alienating customers and stay out of the culture wars. Unfortunately, a number of CEOs haven't figured this out. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Talking today in studio with Dr. Merrill Matthews, again, resident scholar with the Institute for Policy Innovation, has his PhD in humanities from the University of Texas, but also has spoken on these issues for many years, written on so many of these issues in terms of health care. I've said before, there are very few people in the country that know as much about health care policy, and he's right up there with Dr. Tom Price, who's now going to be the Secretary of Health and Human Services. And
Lord willing, if he gets past the confirmation, he will be.
Well, and again, that's one of the reasons why I posted the first article. We've got a lot to talk with you about today. And again, if you'd like to ask questions, I know some of you have some questions about healthcare policy and healthcare insurance and the rest, but the article we've posted is a link to the Institute for Policy Innovation. Now we know what the Republican Obamacare replacement plan will look like. And part of the reason we know that is because of Representative Tom Price is now going to be Secretary, we think, of Health and Human Services, Tom Price, and that gives us a pretty good idea of what the plan would look like.
Right. His plan and House Speaker Paul Ryan's plan are very similar. Paul Ryan's is in draft form. It's sort of an outline of what he wants to do, whereas Price actually has legislative language. I had a friend when that piece published in Forbes saying, well, it's really going to be the Ryan plan. Well, Ryan doesn't actually have legislative language, and if you're trying to move this quickly,
yes,
you want to try to get the legislative language. So I think what will happen is some kind of amalgamation of what Price does once and Paul Ryan, and they're very similar, will be the basis for negotiations for where we go forward. And at least I would hope that would be the case, because Tom Price's plan is actually a pretty good plan.
Yes, well, and again, we're going to get into some of the details about that. And if you want to ask a question about this, certainly the case. The first obvious one is one we've talked about before, tax fairness. Mm-hmm. Because those of us that buy our insurance individually do not benefit tax-wise by like those who have it applied and actually provided by an employer. So how does this plan actually begin to level the playing field there?
Now, this is a really key point, because some, even conservatives, are calling calling what Tom Price did sort of an Obamacare light because there are some subsidies. But to your point, conservatives have for decades said we need to have tax fairness. If we get our health insurance through an employer, that's a tax exclusion. We don't pay income taxes on that money. The federal government loses, depending upon who your estimates, $280-300 billion a year based upon that tax exclusion. Now, we're not paying that money, so that's good. We like that. But if you're self-employed, you get 100% deduction. If you work for an employer who does not provide health insurance, you get no tax break. So conservatives have said for years, let's have a sort of a tax fairness around there. Right. So you could provide those people who work for an employer who doesn't provide health insurance with a tax deduction, but that doesn't actually help them if they're lower income because they may not even be paying any income taxes. So Tom Price, Paul Ryan, and generally a number of Republicans have said, let's do a refundable tax credit. It's a tax break for them. If they have $5,000 in income taxes, and you're providing a $3,000 credit, that comes off there and you only owe $2,000. But the key is if you don't pay any income taxes, you get the money back in a refundable form that you could provide to an insurance company or something like that and get your health insurance. So it actually is a backdoor way of providing a subsidy, but doing it by creating tax fairness.
Well, again, we'll get into like health savings accounts and a few other things and how that would help. But before we run out of time, we want to talk about the big issue, and that is the issue of pre-existing conditions. Because you have said on this program, and you write this in this article in Forbes and in many other places as well, a problem that, as a matter of fact, you wrote one whole column just on the fact that you've got to deal with this issue because pre-existing conditions, we, on the one hand, want to protect individuals who have pre-existing conditions, but on the other hand, whether it's Romney Care or now Obamacare, you know what's been taking place, and that is individuals say, well, since I can always be covered, I really won't treat this like insurance. I'll treat it like if I just had a car accident, I call up and say, can I get car insurance for the accident I just had a few minutes ago? Right. Or can I get house insurance because my house is burning right now? That's not really insurance, is it?
That's right. So this doesn't really affect the 165 million Americans who get health insurance through an employer. Doesn't affect Medicare. Doesn't affect Medicaid. It only affects individuals who want to go out and buy health insurance. Vast majority of them can get covered. But if you have a pre-existing condition and you're uninsured, then historically the insurance company could say, well, we'll cover you, but we won't cover that aspect of it. Have a rider on there. We may charge you a little more, or we won't cover you at all. So if you come in and say the insurance companies have to accept them, then you create an incentive for people to wait to the last minute. So yes. What Tom Price is trying to do is to say, well, look, if you've been covered and you change from one plan to another, pre-existing conditions don't apply. If you're uncovered, if you're uninsured, and you have a medical condition you want to get coverage, then the insurance company can hold off on that pre-existing condition for paying anything for it for 18 months. Yeah. And that creates a sort of that doesn't encourage you to wait to the last minute. And indeed, because you can move from plan to plan, if you have coverage, it actually encourages you to stay covered.
Now, one of the questions I'm sure we'll get from people is, well, is that really an issue? I mean, do you really have individuals that wait till they get cancer or they break a leg or whatever it might be and then get insurance? What kind of experience?
The Congressional Budget Office estimated about 4 or 5 years ago that roughly 3 million, maybe 4 million people could benefit from that. It's a lot of people, but it's actually, 1% or less of the U.S. population. So it's a fairly small percent. So what you want to do is create a safety net. Tom Price and Paul Ryan do this, create what's called a high-risk pool, state-created entity. So if you're uninsured and you're uninsurable because you've now got cancer or diabetes or something like that, you can go into the high-risk pool. You pay a little more for the premium for that. They don't want everybody jumping in that program, but it is a safety net for them.
You know, you mentioned those high-risk pools. That's another question I know we sometimes get, and that is they'll say, the one in my state didn't do very well.
That's right.
Is that true?
There were 35 high-risk pools before Obamacare started. Some worked well. Texas worked pretty well. Illinois worked well. Wisconsin worked well. California limited it to like 3,000 people, and that doesn't help because if you have this problem.
Yes.
So you want to have some kind of best practices. Price and Ryan both want to provide federal money to help subsidize subsidize the things. They typically cost you, when they were functioning, about 50% more than standard insurance. People and critics of it said, "Oh, that's terrible. You're having to pay 50% more." Most of us would love to be paying just 50% more than what we were paying 4 years ago.
Yes, I would think so. Anyway, just an illustration of just a couple of points. One more we'll take before the break, and then if you'd like to join our conversation, we'll open up the phones, 1-800-351-1212. And that's one I mentioned just a minute ago, health savings accounts. Now, you know that Tom Price will probably push them, and even though he will be the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, I'm thinking that Dr. Ben Carson is going to push them too. So you're going to have some national advocates for that. Some of our listeners have used health savings account, but explain what that is and how that would be helpful.
A health savings account is just a tax-free account for individuals and employers to be able to deposit money, and you can use that money for health care purposes. They are under law right now. They have to be tied to a high deductible policy, a qualified high deductible policy. Republicans have said they want to expand those to let Medicare people have them, the VA and others. I think I would even encourage getting rid of the insurance requirement so that you could just have a health savings account. And I would even encourage going one step further. This is similar to what the Cato Institute wants to do, which is to say an employer can create a health savings account, deposit however much that employer is going to be spending on your health insurance, put it in your account, and let you decide, do I want to buy into the employer's plan? Do I want to leave and go buy something else because something's better over here? Or maybe I might stay uninsured just because I don't want to spend that money, or I've got some assets and I can protect myself from major expenses, and I just want to use this money to pay for my routine expenditures. Health savings accounts are typically for smaller and routine expenditures, and it's a very good way to force people to be value-conscious shoppers because it's their money coming out of their account.
Well, as we've said before, if we go out to dinner and somebody else is picking up the tab, we're not really paying that much attention to the right side of the menu. We're just looking at the left side. But if we're paying for it, we pay attention to the cost, and that's very important.
And it encourages people to live healthier lifestyles, because now instead of sending the bill to a third party, you actually have money in your health savings account you're paying for these smaller and routine expenditures.
Yeah, it's very good. Let's take a break. When we come back, I want to ask you some questions about Medicare and Medicaid and fraud. We talked with Stephen Moore about that earlier in the week, and I know you've written about this as well, and also about these executive orders and much more. Quite a lot of material that you can find out about by going to our website, pointofview.net, or even going to IPI.org, which stands for the Institute for Policy Innovation. And we're doing that this week because we really wanted to just again highlight some of the various topics we address throughout every week. And this week we've looked at such issues as economics and apologetics and Islam. Today we're looking at healthcare. Tomorrow we're going to be talking about everything from the Second Amendment to LGBT issues. And those are just a few of the topics we address here on Point of View. And if you value what we are doing in terms of educating you and the next generation and really teaching you discernment, we encourage you to visit our website. We have a button there that says Be the Light to Our World, and this is an encouragement for you to consider what you might do to support us between now and the end of the year. And we have it used to be $20,000 matching fund. It's now $70,000 matching fund, so that means your gift of $50 becomes $100, $200 becomes $400. So visit the website, pointofview.net. We'll continue our conversation right after these important messages.
Opportunity. Sometimes you get one chance to make a difference. Not long ago, many of us feared what might happen if the election turned out differently. Would religious liberty survive? And even though Donald Trump has promised to appoint judges and establish policies to protect our freedoms, now is not the time to sit back. Now is the time to press forward and educate people and engage our leaders to defend liberty and change the culture. Today, you can seize an opportunity by giving to Point of View. We have a matching gift that doubles your investment up to $20,000. I'm looking for at least one person who will step up with $5,000 or more, and others to chip in $25, $50, $100, gifts that will be doubled and help us meet this opportunity. Click the banner at pointofview.net and be the light in your community. Or call 800-347-5151 or mail your donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Seize this opportunity and be the light. Pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today with Dr. Merrill Matthews in studio with us. And if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Again, I will alert you in the second hour, we're going to be focusing on different topics. So if you have a comment or a question, love to get those, and I will get to those in just a minute. But let me talk about, for just a minute, the Institute for Policy Innovation. We have a link to ipi.org, and of course, we can find some of your articles. Now we know what the Republican Obamacare replacement plan will look like, why why overturning Obama's legacy is a constitutional necessity. But so that people don't typecast you just as an energy or as a healthcare guy, you're also an energy guy for sure, because you have material here on the ethanol standard, fracking. Some of your other colleagues have talked about the internet. So really a very important place to go to get good information is the Institute for Policy Innovation.
IPI covers a number of topics: healthcare, entitlements, welfare, tax policy, communications and technology policy. And of course, I got involved in energy policy 4 or 5 years ago, both because I was getting tired of doing healthcare all the time. And the other thing was that it's become such a key factor in our economies these days. I mean, for years, decades, energy was sort of going down, which is why we got the ethanol mandate and some of the other things. But with the fracking boom and other things, we've become the world's largest oil and natural gas producer. We are now exporting both of those things, and we can use those for energy independence and provide our allies with energy that so they don't have to depend upon the Russians.
Yes, well, and the next energy secretary looks like it'll be Rick Perry, so he might know something about that as well. I want to get into the issue of Medicare fraud. You've written about that, and also I know you have a book coming out sometime in the future on the entitlement cliff, but let me take a call that relates to savings accounts
Absolutely.
first. So we'll go to Illinois, WPEO. Daryl, I think you have some questions about health savings accounts. Thank you for joining us today.
Certainly. I've had an FHA for a long time, and I really appreciate it. But shopping for health care for price is easier said than done.
It is.
I know we'd like to get the government out, but unless somebody mandates some transparency, it's like pulling teeth to get a quote out of anybody.
Daryl's absolutely right, especially with hospitals, because so often the hospital pricings, to be kind or unkind, is just a sham.
Yes.
Hospitals create these prices that they put out there because they know they're going to negotiate them down with insurers. Medicare comes along and tells them what they're going to pay them and so forth. So it's been very, very difficult to bring that real sort of consumer-driven aspect to medical care. It works to some extent in the lower price things. I mean, you've got a lot of clinics out there. Target, CVS, and so forth has these little minute clinics and so forth. They post the prices. It's something where you can go and find out what the price is, and it encourages people to do that. But once you get past those, it becomes much more difficult. So Daryl's absolutely right. It will take more people. You've got now, I think, about 40 million people with HSAs now, if I remember right. No, excuse me, I take that back. It's about 25 million, and they have about $40 billion in there, somewhere around there. So it's growing. It just needs to grow more, and then you'll have that pressure.
Well, again, I've used them before. I don't have a situation now where I use them because it's just some changes, but was really helpful because then you can begin to comparison shop. And as you said, a lot of what we should be doing is doing preventative care, and making sure that we're doing healthy things so that we don't have to go to the doctor in the first place.
And, one of the things that's happening is so many doctors are just stepping away from Obamacare. They just don't want to treat under that.
Yeah.
I was visiting with Dr. Tom Coburn, former senator from Oklahoma. He's a medical doctor, and I asked him about, are you still practicing? Because he was for a while. And he said, no way I will practice under this administration because of the things they're doing. Increasingly, those doctors who are pulling out are simply going to say, I'm not taking insurance anymore. Here's my price, and you can find those prices. And it's a small movement, but it is a movement happening out there.
What about this issue of fraud? I know that you've written on this, and you are certainly, again, one of those experts that people call upon every once in a while. When we look at Medicare, Medicaid fraud, it's pretty significant, isn't it?
Oh, it's rampant. It is rampant. It used to be, this has been 5 or 6 years ago since I saw this, but there was a website that kept track of the mafia, and they pointed out, there were several articles on there about how the mafia were moving from New York to Florida so that they could engage in Medicare fraud because the profits were so big and the penalties were so small, and nobody was trying to shoot them because they were going after the federal government, not each other's turf.
Yeah. Well, and I've seen stories of, like they found this one dentist that was involved in all this Medicare fraud, and it's just so obvious in some cases. What is keeping us from actually beginning to deal with that? Because this incoming administration, of course, every administration talks about getting rid of waste and fraud and abuse. use. But I do get the sense that Donald Trump is a lot more serious about that, because that's kind of the way he runs his business.
Absolutely. In fact, the Affordable Care Act provided, I believe, $70 million to create a kind of a fraud technology center at the Department of Health and Human Services. And Tom Coburn, before he left, was pointing out how little they had actually found, even though there's billions and billions of dollars involved in this.
So, again, just another one of those issues that need to be addressed. While we're talking about that, I know you're going to have a book coming out on the entitlement cliff. And so now we're talking about Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, welfare. A lot of people are concerned because if we do some things to prevent us from going off the cliff, they're afraid they're not going to get the benefits that they signed up for. In other words, I have people calling all the time, Dr. Matthews, where say, well, I paid into Social Security, I expect to get it back.
Right.
You've got a plan that you've talked about in which you can still provide a safety net, but still help us have the possibility of not going broke in the next 20 or 30 years.
Well, with respect to Social Security, 3 counties in Texas opted out of Social Security in 1981 and 1982. So they've been operating outside of it for more than 30 years. They have private accounts. It's managed by a financial manager, so people aren't day trading with it. And these county employees have never lost a dime.
That's right.
They have made money every year in those accounts. Now, sometimes they make a little bit. Sometimes they make a lot if the stock market's doing better. But most of them tend to retire with about twice the amount of money that most of us have with Social Security, and it is their money. If they die, that whole pot of assets goes to their family.
Yeah, and that's one of the problems with Social Security, because it's sort of a contract, but it's not much of one, because like you said, if you die, it doesn't go there. And really, we don't have a Social Security trust fund, do we?
We don't. We borrowed all the money, and we put out, and Democrats keep coming up saying that's backed by the full faith and trust of the federal government. And who's got any faith and trust in the federal government anymore?
Well, and the other issue that surfaced the other day when we had Stephen Moore on, somebody called in and said, would you explain the national debt? And I said, well, again, let's be honest. The national debt has doubled. I mean, in round numbers, when Barack Obama took office, it was pretty close to $10 trillion. As he leaves and Donald Trump takes the oath of office, it's going to be pretty much $20 trillion. So basically, in 8 years, we have run up as much debt as we did from George Washington to George W. Bush.
Right.
And people were saying, how do you do that? So I started taking them through the budget and all the rest, where we were running deficits in the trillions of dollars. But that's another one of those issues where you don't see, how do we turn this around? And I don't know that you do right away.
That's about $20 trillion on the books. But then, of course, there's Social Security and Medicare, what we call unfunded liabilities, because we owe people who've been paying in, and we don't have the money to pay that yet. So the unfunded liability is the amount we think we owe that we won't be getting money for. And that, depending upon how I believe it's about $17-18 trillion in Social Security for about 75 years out. If you look at Medicare, it used to be $100 trillion.
That's right.
But because the Affordable Care Act said we'll be paying doctors a lot less, that actually dropped. They lost $50 trillion in there somewhere. So, but these are phenomenal numbers. I mean, you can't even get your arms around these kinds of numbers.
These are astronomical numbers you use in astronomy, but nowhere else. And so, again, it just illustrates the need to begin to turn the ship around. So do you have any sense, just before we run out of time here, that at least in the Department of Health and Human Services, you've known Tom Price for many years. Do you think he's going to turn the ship at all? What's your thoughts?
I think he will certainly try, and I think he'll have a lot of help with Paul Ryan from the House. So what we need is your listeners to keep the pressure up by talking to their members of Congress, talking to sending letters to Tom Price and others to make sure that they have the courage of their convictions, because they want to do something, but they'll be hearing a lot of pushback from the media and Democrats about how bad it will be. So you've got to have people standing up and say, we support you repealing Obamacare and replacing it with something better.
Again, Dr. Merrill Matthews with us today. We just wanted to give you a little bit of a feel for some of the work that he is doing. And again, I would encourage you, if you have some questions about healthcare policy, you can go to the Institute for Policy Innovation. It's IPI.org. And that's just one of the reasons we wanted to bring him in today, just to, again, illustrate that these are topics we're going to be addressing next year. And as we look at the number of people that listen to this program, we really want you to be educated, equipped, and empowered to make a difference. And I hope that you'll consider what you might do to support us as we come to year end. Again, don't forget that we have a matching gift. Yesterday it was $20,000. Now it is $70,000.
Huge amount.
So this would be something where not only could we certainly match any gift that you have for a one-time gift, you might also join with us for $1 a day, $30 a month, and become part of our truth team. So take the time to visit the website, pointofview.net. And, of course, you'll find a link to the Institute for Policy Innovation. Dr. Merrill Matthews, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
We'll take a break and be back with more right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Jonas Yoder was a member of the Old Order Amish living in the state of Wisconsin. Yoder and others lived carefully according to their religious tradition in a community with other Amish and away from the influence of the modern world. After the 8th grade, Old Order Amish school children do not continue to high school where much is taught in variance with their Amish way of life. Instead, the children return to the home where they are instilled with the virtues of goodness, wisdom, and community welfare by their family. But these families ran into a problem as they sought to live out their religion that had motivated their families since the 16th century. The state of Wisconsin required students to attend school through at least the high school age of 16. Yoder's case went all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States that held that the state of Wisconsin could not compel these Amish families to send their children to high school. According to the court, only those interests of the highest order and those not otherwise served can overbalance legitimate claims to the free exercise of religion. Wisconsin v. Yoder was among the first cases that helped articulate an important balancing test that weighed a state's interest in governing against an individual's right to the free exercise of religion. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Students and teachers are being told that prayer, Bibles, and religion are illegal in public school, but that's not true. Learn the facts. Read your free Religious Liberty Protection Kit for students and teachers at firstliberty.org right now. Don't let anyone steal your freedom with bad information. Get your Religious Liberty Protection Kit for students and teachers at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
One of the reasons we're doing these programs this week is just, again, to remind you of all the different topics we address here on Point of View. Oftentimes, as we start the program, we even talk about the various issues we will address. And already this week, we've talked with Greg Kokel about apologetics and how to defend the Christian faith and how to really deal with this rise of atheism and how to use questions in our evangelism. We've talked with Stephen Moore about the rise of the national debt, as well as some of these economic principles and whether or not some of the things that will be enacted in the next administration will be helpful in growing the economy. Yesterday, talked with Robert Spencer, of course, about radical Islam as well as terrorism, and wanted you to be aware of some of the material he has at Jihad Watch. And, of course, yesterday afternoon, we spent some time talking about some of the threats to our Christian faith, even during this Christmas season. We'll get into a little bit more of that in the second hour today with Tommy Nelson. And, of course, we just spent a few minutes with Dr. Merrill Matthews as we talked about what this Republican Obamacare healthcare replacement plan will look like. And if you're taking some notes, let me mention that there are really three major elements that we need to understand. And as you're interacting with other people, even around the Christmas table, some are going to say, I don't know, we certainly got to wonder what's going to happen with our health insurance plans. There were really three things we talked about with him. One, of course, is the idea of tax credits for those who do not have coverage from an employer. It's unfair right now. It's not a level playing field. Individuals that actually receive their health insurance from an employer benefit from taxes that those who obtain it individually do not. So this would be something that would be very helpful and would actually be beneficial and also establish tax fairness. The second, and one that really needs to be addressed, is this issue of pre-existing conditions. On the one hand, we certainly want to protect individuals that have pre-existing conditions and leave from one policy to another. But on the other hand, there has been this problem, and it surfaced first in Romneycare in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. It surfaced now in Obamacare, in which individuals pretty much game the system. That's, I think, one of the major reasons why we still have about 30 million people that are uninsured. They just say to themselves, well, if I get sick, well, then I'll get insurance. Well, that's not insurance. That's getting it after the fact. And as I used an illustration before, you would think it would be ludicrous for somebody that's in the middle of a car accident and steps out of their car and calls their insurance company and said, I want to get car insurance for an accident I just had. You'd say, well, that's not what insurance is for. Or if your house is burning down and saying, well, as my house is burning down, let me call my insurer and make sure that I get house insurance, fire insurance. I mean, we understand that this isn't the way it is. So there is a system that Tom Price has put together which would cause people to be incentivized to get this, but still protect those individuals with pre-existing conditions. And then as we talked just a minute ago with Daryl, he talked about the health savings accounts. And, of course, that gets us to another issue. Dr. Tom Price and the Secretary of Health and Human Services is going to have a lot more transparency. But when we talked about these health savings accounts, again, quite a number of individuals, almost 20 million health savings accounts. I think it's 18.2 million in this article. And so if you'd like to read a little bit more, we've posted that on the website, pointofview.net. One of the concerns I have when we talk about this issue of health care relates to a commentary that came out just a couple of days ago. And if you didn't get my commentary, you can find it on the website, pointofview.net. Just go to the commentaries and see additional commentaries. And it was entitled Purge Christian Doctors, because what we're starting to see is something I sort of expected. And that is some of these doctors are saying, wait a minute. We should not allow Christian doctors to be conscientious objectors. And so the article that appeared in this very prestigious bioethics journal was, doctors have no right to refuse medical assistance in dying, abortion, or contraception. As I pointed out in the commentary, I'm really bothered by the way those three were lumped together, because I don't know very many doctors or physicians that balk at prescribing contraception. Even if they do, it is readily available in all sorts of different forms in your local drugstore. But that's very different than the issue of abortion and euthanasia. And if you remember that there was a time not so long ago where doctors took the Hippocratic Oath, which actually said, I will not give a woman a pessary to produce or to cause an abortion. And then also, neither will I administer a poison to anyone when asked to do so. So the idea of abortion and euthanasia were not even part of medical practice. But today, of course, because of the legalization of abortion, because of the Supreme Court decision of Roe versus Wade, and because certain states now have physician-assisted suicide, the argument is that these should be not only allowed, but if a Christian doctor were not to actually do those kinds of procedures, abortion, physician-assisted suicide, whatever, then that should be enough to disqualify them because of their pro-life commitment from even going to medical school and from even practicing medicine. So if you want to read more about that, you can find my commentary, and it's one of those attempts that we give you so that you will be aware of some of the kinds of discussions taking place. for many, many years, I began to see discussions in various journals about physician-assisted suicide long before we ever had legalized physician-assisted suicide. You could go to other kinds of journals and see people talking about we need to legalize and decriminalize marijuana. Now you see what is taking place. So sometimes you can get a handle on where the society might move if indeed you are willing to look at some of these technical journals. And so this is just one illustration of what might be on the offing and why we need to be standing for life, and certainly encourage you to do so every day. One of the things that Dr. Merrill Matthews said as he left is it really is going to be important for you to make sure that you let your particular views known to not only the incoming administration, but also to your elected representatives. He's a little bit concerned and really shared with me off air that some of these individuals might get weak-kneed. And so this is why I think you see that Dr. Tom Price, who will now be the Secretary of Health and Human Services if he's confirmed, and I hope that he will be, and also Speaker Paul Ryan believes that they need to move fairly quickly on this idea of repeal and replace, because otherwise there will be all sorts of pressure being brought by the other side, and many of the Republicans that have talked about repeal and replace will make sure that they still talk about it, but will also make sure that it doesn't happen. And that's a concern that certainly he expressed, and one of the reasons why I think you need to be listening to Point of View every single day. We have these action items, and as we begin to identify some important action items this next year, I hope that you will join with us. And I hope you also recognize how important it is to support this ministry. As I shared with you yesterday, when you look at Planned Parenthood, according to Gary Bauer, they've received 200,000 new individual donations. The ACLU, which I mentioned yesterday afternoon when we talked about the taking down the cross from the Christmas tree, ACLU has had a record fundraising haul of more than $7 million. So that's what the other side is doing. The question is, what are we going to do? And I hope that you will consider what you might do to join with us before the end of this year to make a substantial gift to Point of View. And given the fact now that our matched total has jumped rather dramatically from $20,000 now to $70,000, I would encourage you to also consider whether or not, as we begin this new year, you might join with us to be one of those Truth Team members. For as little as $1 a day, $30 a month, $360 a year, you can certainly be a Truth Team member. We send you all sorts of benefits and gifts, but again, I know you don't give to get. And some of you might even want to join at a very significant level, maybe $50 a month, $100 a month, whatever you would want to do. We certainly encourage you to do that. And we've made it very easy for you to go to the website, pointofview.net. You'll see a banner there that says, "Be the light of our world." Be the light to the world, because indeed that's what we need to do as we come into this next year. So let me encourage you to take the time to visit the website, to make your generous gift, and to consider what we need to do to pray for this nation. That is a topic we're going to have with Tommy Nelson, and we'll talk with him and you right after this.
Opportunity. Sometimes you get one chance to make a difference. Not long ago, many of us feared what might happen if the election turned out differently. Would religious liberty survive? And even though Donald Trump has promised to appoint judges and establish policies to protect our freedoms, now is not the time to sit back. Now is the time to press forward and educate people and engage our leaders to defend liberty and change the culture. Today, you can seize an opportunity by giving to Point of View. We have a matching gift that doubles your investment up to $20,000. I'm looking for at least one person who will step up with $5,000 or more, and others to chip in $25, $50, $100, gifts that will be doubled and help us meet this opportunity. Click the banner at pointofview.net and be the light in your community. Or call 800-347-5151. Or mail your donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Seize this opportunity and be the light. Pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today here on Point of View, and if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Just a few minutes, we're going to be talking with Pastor Tommy Nelson. You might remember that he gave that very significant sermon that went viral on the Continental Divide, and I thought it would be good to get him in talking about some of his reflections after the election. But most importantly, his church has put together 100 days of prayer between now and the actual inauguration, and we're going to talk about the importance of prayer. And if you've listened to Point of View, you know how often we talk about this. We've had our Pray for America campaign. We still have those booklets available to anybody that would like to obtain those. Of course, every year we talk about the National Day of Prayer and do interviews on that. See you at the poll. And in just a few minutes, I'll even give you some of the history of prayer in America. So we're going to focus some time and attention on that. But before we do so, I thought I would come back to a few things that we've put on the table in terms of commentaries. If you've not signed up for my daily commentary, this is one that comes out every single day. And we actually make this available not only to the radio stations that carry this program, but to many other networks that don't carry this program. As a matter of fact, Tim Wildman was talking about the kind of reach that is having is very significant. And on Monday, you might remember, we spent some time talking about economics, and even next week, or the week after, I'm going to spend some time talking about my new book, Christians and Economics. We've talked about my book, Christians and Politics. But my commentary just earlier on December 9th was called Communism and a Grocery Store, in which I was quoting from Dr. Ann Bradley. She's been on the radio program with us before, and she talked about her first trip to the Soviet Union, and even then she could begin to see through the attempt to try to make the Soviet Union look a lot better than it was. And so then she ends this article by telling a story of Boris Yeltsin, who at that time was newly elected to the Soviet Parliament and the Supreme Soviet, and he was visiting the Johnson Space Center and then made an unscheduled stop to Randall's grocery store in Houston. And this trip to really just kind of a simple grocery store changed him forever. He said, for example, that he roamed the aisles to see the number of products available to every customer, and they were even offering free cheese samples, and he was almost instantaneously overwhelmed because he could not believe, as he said, the bounty that was before him. Even members of the elite Politburo did not have the choices available to every American citizen right there in that grocery store in Houston. So a reporter later captured some of his comments in an article that appeared in the Houston Chronicle, and here's what Boris Yeltsin said. He said, "When I saw those shelves crammed with hundreds, thousands of cans, cartons, and goods of every possible sort, for the first time I felt quite frankly sick with despair for the Soviet people." He then went on to say that such a potentially super-rich country as ours has been brought to such a state of poverty, it is terrible to think of it. And if you think about the statement, I mean, here is a man who was so powerful. He was perhaps at that time the most powerful person in the Soviet Union, or the former Soviet Union, you might say by that time, of Russia, well connected politically. But even though he had lots of political power, he was almost powerless to provide to the Russian people what was typically provided to any American just on the shelves of just one grocery store there in Houston. And that's because the communist government would obviously fail to provide the basic necessities because a controlled economy does not work very well. And after doing that commentary last week, I came across a piece by John Stossel. And John Stossel is actually going to end his Fox Business Network TV show. Not that he will stop doing television. He's done it for ABC. He's done it for Fox. But he really felt that there was a need for him to maybe launch out in another direction. And so he says he wants to create a libertarian internet-based platform with Reason TV and actually be part of the Institute's new Media and Journalism Fellowship program. But, of course, he'll still make appearances on Fox News. And he says one of the difficulties he's had is trying to explain the importance of a free market. Because he said, when you talk about Adam Smith's invisible hand, well, for a lot of people, it's kind of invisible. Or even Friedrich Hayek talks about spontaneous order, but it's hard to show. So this is why he began to use an illustration of a skating rink. Now, this comes from a book, interestingly enough, called Rinkonomics, A Window on Spontaneous Order. I'm going to go buy the book, but I've read about it here by John Stossel. And he says this inspired him to actually rent a skating rink. And I think it illustrates again why you have Boris Yeltsin, who, as he controlled the Russian economy, could not provide the kinds of goods and services that were being provided, just for example, in that grocery store in Houston. And he says, imagine if you've never seen a rink and you're a government regulator who approves new businesses. I tell you, I will flood the arena, freeze the water, then charge people money to strap sharp blades on their feet and zip around on the ice. I will have few rules. Anyone can skate, young or old, skilled or unskilled. Most any regulator would resist my bizarre skating idea. Hillary Clinton might say that for my rink to be approved, it must have stoplights, skating police, and barriers between skilled and unskilled skaters, adults, and children. I must have someone with a megaphone directing the skaters to make sure they don't smash into each other. So he says, I actually tried that. I rented a rink and bossed people around. You, turn left. You, slow down. Of course, the skaters hated it, and it didn't make skating safer. Some people responding to my instructions lost their balance and fell. There is spontaneous order, he says, in a normal skating rink. Skaters make their own decisions. No regulator knows the wishes, skills, and immediate intentions of individual skaters better than skaters themselves. Regulators might say my attempts to direct skaters failed because I'm not a skating expert. On my TV show, one guest said regulation must be done by technocrats with expertise. So I hired an expert. I just love what he's doing here. An Olympic skater. She did no better with a megaphone. No technocrat has enough expertise to direct the skaters on the ice. For safety, skater rinks usually just have a few employees who police reckless skaters and simple rules like skate counterclockwise. That's enough. Good thing rinks were invented before the modern regulatory state took over. Leave people free to make their own choices and spontaneous order arises. Skaters find their own path. Buyers and sellers adjust to changing prices. Families raise kids. Musicians create jazz. That's what I've tried to demonstrate on my show. Control freaks, he says, have criticized such spontaneity for at least 2,400 years. Plato warned that music should be simple so that it does not stir up passion. In America, Ladies' Home Journal once warned that jazz would lead to breaking away from all rules. Lucky America didn't have a Department of Music Safety then, or jazz would have been banned. He says, over 7 years on the Stossel Show, I've done all sorts of stunts trying to explain the benefits of liberty. I've dressed up as a founder and Santa and Uncle Sam, begged for money on Manhattan streets, broken windows, collected signatures on petitions to ban dangerous chemicals like dihydrogen monoxide, that's water, stolen things from children, held a racist, that is affirmative action, a bake sale, smashed cars with a sledgehammer inspired by the Cash for Clunkers government program, and cut the federal budget with a chainsaw. If it helps to explain the benefits of freedom, I'll try it. So if nothing else, great story about, again, spontaneous order that comes from an ice skating rink. I think I'll use that as a commentary in the future, but just again illustrates the kinds of things we need to do in order to educate the next generation. That's what we're doing here on Point of View, and we certainly encourage your financial support. We'll be back with Tommy Nelson right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, the CEOs of major corporations may be smart people when it comes to business, but many of them apparently do not know when to keep their comments to themselves about the 2016 presidential election. Their public rants against Donald Trump's election and their criticism of voters isn't likely to encourage people to buy their products. Matt Maloney is the CEO of Grubhub. The company offers takeout, but often seems more intent in telling its conservative employees to get out. After criticizing the president-elect and the people who voted for him, he concluded, "If you do not agree with this statement, then please reply to this email with your resignation, because you have no place here. We do not tolerate hateful attitudes on our team." Bill Penzi of Penzi Spices went on a rant about Donald Trump and then concluded with a pointed comment to anyone who was stupid enough to vote for him. He said, "You really are a good bunch, but you just committed the biggest act of racism in American history since Wallace stood at the schoolhouse doorway 53 years ago." The company to join these ranks is the Kellogg's Company. It recently announced its decision to pull ads from the conservative media giant Breitbart.com. The company executives argued that the 45 million monthly conservative readers of Breitbart are not aligned with our values as a company. Breitbart responded by explaining that they are fearless advocates for traditional American values. Perhaps the most important among these is freedom of speech. They also launched a Dump Kellogg's petition and called for a boycott of Kellogg's cereals, Eggos, Pringles, and other brands. As I've said in previous commentaries, it would be wise for businesses and corporations to stop alienating customers and stay out of the culture wars. Unfortunately, a number of CEOs haven't figured this out. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
As we've been talking about, we have in studio with us today Pastor Tommy Nelson, pastor of Denton Bible Church, individual that has been a speaker at Metro and Fellowship of Christian Athletes, a graduate of North Texas and Dallas Theological Seminary, and probably very well known these days for having delivered that message about the continental divide. And then, of course, I had a chance to be in your church a week later, and then you gave a message after the election. But I was with some of our friends that said they were with you Tuesday night, and you were writing a message, and you got through about 4 pages of the end of civilization.
It was going to be the end of civilization as we know it, and that was going to be what happens. Eric Metaxas said that if Hillary Clinton becomes president, it will not be a problem for 4 years or 8 years or 12 years, but Western civilization as we know it will be gone. And I was prepared for that. And then at about 8 o'clock, I was just watching it, and I kind of slowed down. And at about 8:30, I said to my buddy Keith Chancey that I was with there at Branson, I said, I don't know a whole lot about politics, but I would swear things are turning around as I watch this. And I would watch the shots on the Clinton camp and on the Trump camp.
Yes.
And then I would watch CNN, and then I would watch Fox, and the voices on one would go down and the voices would go up.
Yeah.
And I said, somebody's singing also. And at about 9, I quit doing the message. And at about 9:30, I signed it and I handed it to Keith Chancey. And I said, this is the message that was never, ever given. And I said, if you can sell it on eBay if I ever get shot or anything. And then at later at about 10 o'clock, it was done. Yeah. And I still am not sure how it happened.
Yeah.
But it happened.
It certainly did. And again, let's go back to your first message, the continental divide, because a lot of people appreciated that for two reasons. Number one, as a pastor to address an issue that you'd never done before. I think it's fair to say that
I said that I knew as much about politics as I did about computers.
Yes.
Which is nothing.
And again, people have known you over the years for talking about Solomon and sex and all those kinds of things, even having gone through depression and, all sorts of issues. But you're getting to be known now. Almost everybody knows you as the pastor that did the message on the continental divide.
I've gone from sex to depression to politics.
And then, of course, after the message, first of all, then, of course, I had a chance to speak. Well, then the election took place. Okay, those 4 pages didn't end up, and I've had a chance to watch your message after the election. What are your thoughts about that now? I'd love to hear that.
I got more Kerby response, positive, thank you, than anything I've ever done in 40 years of ministry. And the funny thing, though, it was from people our age, me and you, and up. And it has kind of distressed me that the 20 to 35, the millennials, if you will, I have not heard much from. I only had 7 dissenting votes. One was from a 70-year-old woman, and the rest were from young guys. I'm not sure. I'll throw that to you as to why, but that's the only one. But basically, what I tried to say in the second message is that like one of the Fox guys said, America spoke.
Yeah,
America spoke, and they just kind of rose up and said, no, that an idea of abortion and the loss of religious freedoms, it's just kind of like God says to the ocean, hither you have come, and ye shall come no further. That people are alarmed at an absence of divine absolutes about them, even if it's just in a generic sense, not Christian per se, but just a generic sense of theism, of right and wrong. People are unnerved by that. If the foundations are destroyed, what shall the righteous do? And so I just kind of challenged our church and all of them that God, I think, had given us a reprieve, and that now we have to do something with it for 4 years, maybe 8 years, God willing, 16 years of calling a country back to. I think, Kerby, there's nowhere else for us to go. Philosophically, everything has been done. The death rattle of all rationalism was existentialism. We've gone to the end of it. Mm-hmm. We end up in the 70s. You remember the New Age movement. We just went to worshiping angels and demons and pantheism once again. We've tried every political system, every philosophic system, and the only thing left for us is rules without God, which is a totalitarian state. Mm-hmm. Of arbitrary laws where you enforce them by punishing people that go against them. See also the same-sex rulings. And that what has to happen is that really Western man has to back up and really go back to René Descartes, mm-hmm. that went into his room and started with himself and said, we need to get a standard of truth that we can all agree upon that has nothing to do with the Bible, and we started with reason. And then they would just all be flawed and just kept going downhill until they collapsed. That we have to go back to that point and say, like the Reformation, we're going to go back. The Renaissance had gone back to try to improve Christendom mm-hmm. in the Middle Ages, but they went back to Rome and to Greece. And Mr. Luther and Mr. Calvin and the like said, we went back, but we went back to the wrong place. We got to go back to the Bible. Mm-hmm. And so until there is that return, that's kind of, I think, the Christian manifesto.
Right.
Is that there must be an absolute, and it must come from a God who made the heavens and the earth and the sea and the dry land. We got to go back to that. And until we do, we're always going to kind of resurrect a failing system. We have to go back to that and simply say, man cannot exist without God.
Well, and it seems to me that if you don't have a situation in which you have sort of Christian self-government, then you have to have that external control. Government has to be bigger. So it really is, do we get to the point where we actually begin to understand that if we self-govern ourselves, then you don't need to have a policeman on every street corner.
That's exactly right. Without God, you become an infantile world. And George Orwell said it well. 1984, you're going to have Big Brother that is watching you. And we saw it in Russia, we saw it in Germany, we've seen it in Cuba, we've seen it in China, and sometimes we think that we Americans are above that, and we're not. We're just generations away from breeding out from a people a sense of the divine, and that's when you're in a scary place.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll take some of those calls in just a minute. But one of the things we also put on the website here is your 100 days of prayer every Thursday from now to February. Talk about that, because Charles told me about it, and I thought this would be good to really focus and maybe encourage other churches to do the same.
They always talk about the first 100 days of a president's time. And so I just said to our congregation, we're 4,000 strong, and I said it's not just enough for us to have a Red Sea experience like we had, and that's what I compare it to, Kerby. It was Red Sea. Mm-hmm. We had the Red Sea before us, we had the mountains around us, we had Pharaoh behind us. There was no place to go, but God, you're going to have to do something right here. And I know for a fact enormous numbers of evangelicals and Israeli Christians were praying, and for somebody other than the Democrats to win this thing. And so I said to our congregation, it's not enough for us just to walk through the sea or even sing praises on the other side like Miriam did. We've got to invoke God to lead us through this wilderness right here. And so I said, for the next 100 days, that is 14 weeks of days, that we're going to gather every Thursday, 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock. I said, you bring your lunch, we'll sit and eat and visit till 12:20, and then we're going to pray for 40 minutes not just for the issues of the church. We're going to pray for Mr. Trump, his personal life, his spiritual life, his advisors, his cabinet, the House, the Senate, the governors, for what's happening with Obamacare, for the millennials. I'm distressed at that. I really am. I'm distressed at this generation that is coming up, that a holy fire, as to whether it is there or not, to whether that it has political cause, simply become their religion. And so we're praying for them and just asking for God to do something bigger than we are, for God to do exceeding abundant beyond what we ask or think. And so we're just asking for, in the Old Testament, Kerby, whenever Israel every year would have their 3 days that they would go up for feast and their one fast, that God said, whenever you all leave and go to Jerusalem or wherever I choose to dwell, that I will cause fear to be on the nations about you, and nobody will move into your vacated home site and take it over. You obey me, and I will miraculously take care of things. And he can do that. It's not like you have to have a cause and effect that's going to last for 20 years. God can intervene, and that's what we're praying for.
Well, again, we've posted some of that information. It might be something you would want to do in your church.
Oh, I wish every church would do this.
And so we've made it very easy for you. We have a link, of course, to Tommy Nelson and Denton Bible, but we need to take a break. And we already have some calls coming in, so if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. I looked this up, and during the American Revolution, there were 15 different official prayer proclamations. 8 for Thanksgiving and 7 for prayer and fasting. So it was important for our founders. Maybe it's important for us. We'll be back with more right after this.
Opportunity. Sometimes you get one chance to make a difference. Not long ago, many of us feared what might happen if the election turned out differently. Would religious liberty survive? And even though Donald Trump has promised to appoint judges and establish policies to protect our freedoms, now is not the time to sit back. Now is the time to press forward and educate people and engage our leaders to defend liberty and change the culture. Today, you can seize an opportunity by giving to Point of View. We have a matching gift that doubles your investment up to $20,000. I'm looking for at least one person who will step up with $5,000 or more, and others to chip in $25, $50, $100, gifts that will be doubled and help us meet this opportunity. Click the banner at pointofview.net and be the light in your community. Or call 800-347-5151 or mail your donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Seize this opportunity and be the light. PointOfView.net. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, we have in studio with us today Pastor Tommy Nelson. Love to get your comments, 1-800-351-1212. Many of you perhaps saw the video of his sermon on a continental divide and, of course, have appreciated the fact that pastors oftentimes avoid issues. That's not something Tommy Nelson does, and certainly a very important issue. But also, if you'd like to join us in this last half hour on any other issue, I can see Helen wants to address something we talked about yesterday, some of the concerns social conservatives have of Rex Tillerson, who is being touted as the next head of the State Department. And so let's, if we can, go to North Carolina. Helen, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you, Kerby. I have been watching and listening to see what Trump was going to be doing, and up until a couple days ago, I was really happy with what I was hearing. But then I heard you said something about the fact that he had was behind a push to force the Boy Scouts to cave to the homosexual pressure, and
sadly
also,
true. Yeah,
and that he is also very, very much behind Planned Parenthood. And I thought, now that's not the right person for the State Department. I mean, and last night I thought, well, they said that Sean Hannity was going to have Lou Dobbs on, and he was going to talk about that. And Lou Dobbs came on and said, well, he had not heard any opposition to Mr. Tillerson except for one, which was the one that you talked about. And he said, but that's just a social issue. That doesn't have anything to do with the State Department. And I thought, whoa, wait a minute.
Our former, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton really kind of promoted this issue of abortion on various states and things of that nature. So I think it does. There are two issues. Number one, I think some of the social conservatives don't like Rex Tillerson because of Planned Parenthood and because of the Boy Scout issue and all of that. But the liberals don't like him because of his connection with Russia. So we'll see how that plays out. But I would have to say, up until that time, I would agree with Helen. A lot of these individuals, Tommy, that are in power or going to be tapped, these are our kind of individuals. These are people we've interviewed. Just the last hour, we talked with Dr. Merrill Matthews. He's known Tom Price for years. And I would have to say that Tom Price and Merrill Matthews and your congressman there in Denton are probably three people in the whole country that understand health care better than anybody else. And we've interviewed them. And you have Betsy DeVos on education issues, Ben Carson, who will be the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. So you don't bat 100, but I guess I was hoping for that. But I guess we have to recognize that this is why you have to be praying for those in positions of authority, which is why you're doing that.
Yes, and I guess that's also why if a guy gets no appointment, he has to run the gauntlet of being challenged on things. So I seriously doubt you can have anybody that you're going to put on for a position that you're going to come up with a 10 for 10 on anybody. You just kind of pick what areas can you be less than desirable on, and what can you not be less than desirable upon. Never had to appoint myself. I've had to hire staff, had to put on elders and people like that, but I've never had to put on anybody with as much prestige and dynamic as these men are that they're putting on.
You see these attorney generals. We started the show by talking about what's going on in Killeen, Texas, where this teacher was told to take down Charlie Brown's Christmas because it had Luke 2, verse 11, for unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior who's Christ the Lord. And that was just enough to say, we got to take it down. But then, here you have the attorney general of the state of Texas, Ken Paxton, saying, wait a minute, you can't do that. We have a law that prevents you from doing that. And as whether we look at national, whether Jeff Sessions will be the next attorney general, or we look at Texas with Ken Paxton, who actually was up at your church recently, getting the right people in office makes such a difference. And a person that says elections have no consequences just need to look at the last couple of elections, don't they?
Absolutely. And this is a fellow, Ken Paxton, Mike Burgess, like a lot of these men. Their worldview is, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, man in the image of God, that God has spoken, there is right, there is wrong. Those are the lens, the grid, the spectacles out of which they perceive. And in the same way, someone that is a humanist, someone that is a non-theist, they're going to see with certain spectacles, they're going to make decisions out of that. So, I forgot, I think maybe it was Norm Geisler who said the most important thing about you or any civilization is what it assumes about God. Mm-hmm. And so I feel comfortable when I have these men in there. Like whenever Moses looked for people to step up and help him, and he said, you appoint men of truth who fear God and hate dishonest gain. You get those guys on, and then they can make the decisions. How do they make decisions? Who cares? You make sure they're a certain kind of man. And you remember Moses said, on anything that you can't handle, you bring it to me. That you may have some things we need to have an appellate court system. You bring it to me, then I'll go to God. But if we have those kind of men across the board, you're going to make a whole lot more better decisions than you are bad ones.
Yeah. Well, again, I think that most of us are surprised by how many good decisions. I agree with Helen. This one disturbs me. I would rather John Bolton was the Secretary of State, an individual that had such a profound impact on Clarence Thomas, interestingly enough, when they were both in law school. Nice story that we've told here before. And so we'll see. But let's come back to this issue of prayer for just a minute, because 100 Days of Prayer, if you think about it, prayer was so instrumental in the First Great Awakening, the Second Great Awakening, the Layman's Prayer Revival. Let's talk about that for just a minute, because we so often talk about the political issues, but we've had a Pray for America campaign, and let's, again, just encourage all of our listeners to pray, even about this particular appointment we're talking about, right?
You know, the First Great Awakening, you're talking about early 1700s, 1720 to about 1740, and the first generation of Puritans, Pilgrims, had died off. And you had what was called the Mania of 92, the Salem witch trials. And it was the death of the Puritan dream. And the first generation, I mean, what always motivates you to pray? Answer teenagers. You know what I'm saying? The next generation that comes up. Sure. And they looked up, and there were a number of appeals that went out concerning the spiritual lethargy that they began seeing, that initial fire of the Pilgrims and the Puritans had now given way. And there was a real legitimate fear that we're losing what we initially strove to do when we came to America. And so they began praying. And in the First Great Awakening, it started happening among high school students up in Connecticut and in Southampton. I believe that was the name of it. They started having what was called by Edwards, surprising conversions, a narrative of surprising conversions. Jonathan they started Edwards. Praying. In the Second Great Awakening, back in the 1800s, they looked up, and all of deism and Enlightenment thought had come to America. And college students were calling themselves Rousseau and Voltaire and mocking the things of God. And at Yale University, they had Timothy Dwight did a whole series on biblical inerrancy to the college and erected a moral society, and they began praying. And then, of course, 1859. You can imagine prior to 1861 how they felt. We're about to start killing everybody. Yeah. As soon as Lincoln gets elected, South Carolina takes off. Sumter is fired on. It was scary. And so, Kerby, there's always something that happens that causes a nation to say, maybe we're not as smart as we thought we were. And they look unto heaven. And I think that is in our nation. Philosophy, psychology, education, politics, heck, the great heroes of sports have fallen. As Howard Hendricks would say late in his life, the pulpits are vacant. I'm sorry, the pedestals are vacant. Yeah. And so our country has that sense of, God, help us, step in here. And so I think it's a healthy thing. And so our church, every Tuesday we pray, and we're going to keep doing this, because it's really all you can do is all you can do, and that is to pray, to preach the truth, and to put good men and men who fear God, men of truth, who hate dishonest gain and let those guys step into their positions.
We're going to take a break, but again, let me encourage you to go to the website because we have some links here about the 100 Days of Prayer, and I think this is something that they are doing, of course, at Denton Bible Church, but you need to be doing at your church as well. When we come back, let me just read this proclamation from Abraham Lincoln about the need for us to pray. I thought that would be a very powerful
Can
one.
I say something for Denton Bible? If you're listening out there from your Denton Bible Church, tomorrow at 12 o'clock, if you're sitting around in your house in the environment and the confines of Denton, and you're not there with me to pray, I'm going to invoke a pox upon you. Now, go ahead, Kerby, read your deal.
That's good. We'll take a break, and we'll continue our conversation for a few more minutes with Pastor Tommy Nelson. If you'd like to join our conversation, you are welcome to do so. 1-800-351-1212. But Abraham Lincoln, he actually helped us understand what it was like when you really called a nation to pray. We'll talk about that right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Jonas Yoder was a member of the Old Order Amish living in the state of Wisconsin. Yoder and others lived carefully according to their religious tradition in a community with other Amish and away from the influence of the modern world. After the 8th grade, Old Order Amish school children do not continue to high school where much is taught in variance with their Amish way of life. Instead, the children return to the home where they are instilled with the virtues of goodness, wisdom, and community welfare by their family. But these families ran into a problem as they sought to live out their religion that had motivated their families since the 16th century. The state of Wisconsin required students to attend school through at least the high school age of 16. Yoder's case went all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States that held that the state of Wisconsin could not compel these Amish families to send their children to high school. According to the court, only those interests of the highest order and those not otherwise served can overbalance legitimate claims to the free exercise of religion. Wisconsin v. Yoder was among the first cases that helped articulate an important balancing test that weighed a state's interest in governing against an individual's right to the free exercise of religion. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Students and teachers are being told that prayer, Bibles, and religion are illegal in public school, but that's not true. Learn the facts. Read your free Religious Liberty Protection Kit for students and teachers at firstliberty.org right now. Don't let anyone steal your freedom with bad information. Get your Religious Liberty Protection Kit for students and teachers at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Pastor Tommy Nelson in studio with us for just a few more minutes before we say goodbye for today. And again, we're covering a lot of these different issues, whether it was apologetics and how to defend the Christian faith, economics, Islam, of course, in the first hour today, healthcare, and we'll be talking about the LGBT issue tomorrow with John Stonestreet, talking about Second Amendment with Eric Pratt. But every one of these issues is important. But as we talk about this issue of prayer, I thought I'd read to you what Abraham Lincoln said when he called the nation to prayer. And it's important to recognize that that call came after many people believe he was a Christian. In all sorts of correspondence. Abraham Lincoln talked about himself being a Christian in the broadest sense of the word. But in a letter he wrote to a clergyman, he said this: "When I left Springfield, I asked the people to pray for me." But he says, "I was not a Christian. When I buried my son, the severest trial in my life, I was not a Christian. But I went to Gettysburg and saw the graves of thousands of our soldiers, and I consecrated myself to Christ." And so if you are familiar with his call for prayer, which happened in 1863, he said, "We have been the recipients of the choicest bounties of heaven. We have been preserved these many years in peace and prosperity. We've grown in numbers and wealth and power as no other nation has ever grown, but we have forgotten God. We have forgotten the gracious hand which preserved us in peace and multiplied and enriched and strengthened us, and we have vainly imagined in the deceitfulness of our hearts that all these blessings were produced by some superior wisdom and virtue of our own. Intoxicated with unbroken success, we have become too self-sufficient to feel the necessity of redeeming and preserving grace, too proud to pray to the God that made us. It behooves us then to humble ourselves before the offended power, to confess our national sins, and to pray for clemency and forgiveness." Haven't heard many presidents talk like that since then.
Not bad for a non-college educated fellow or whatever he was.
But it gets us back to this issue of prayer. And I think one of the things that we need to pray for this nation is for those in leadership. In 1 Timothy 2, it says we are to pray for those in authority, and that's our Supreme Court justices, our president, it's our governor, it's our state senators, our state representatives, our U.S. senators. We need to be in prayer. And so one of the things I know that you really want to encourage not only your church, Denton Bible, but other churches to do is to understand how important it is to pray for this nation.
I think, and I would challenge every Christian that is listening to this and that belongs to any church, that it really, Kerby, has to come from the top. It doesn't, it's best if it comes from the top for the shepherd to say, because at our church, I say myself and I have 12 elders, and we are going to be there. That myself, and I've got about 45, 50 staff, we're going to be there. They're going to be there at this prayer time. And I would ask you to join us, all of the leadership of our church, from 12 to 1, and we're not going to pray for the personal needs of our body. There's a time and a place. We're going to pray for those who are in authority. Like Jeremiah was told to invoke to Israel, pray for the welfare of the nation where I send you, and their welfare, you will have welfare. Because Zephaniah looks at the coming of judgment down upon Israel, and then he invokes the remnant. He says, to come to God, and he said, perhaps you'll be hidden in the day of God's wrath. Mm-hmm. Maybe the flood will go around you. And he says that in the 11th hour. Zephaniah is a contemporary of Jeremiah. It's coming. And so I just call to all pastors, just for 1 day a week. That's where the Layman's Prayer Revival just started on a Monday afternoon. It went spread after that. But they met with 6 guys, then 20 guys, then 50 guys. And it was it got to be all different churches. And so I would exhort you to meet with your congregation. And what I do is we'll break up into little groups, and I'll have them pray for a little bit, then I'll just interrupt them, and I'll say, let's pray for Mr. Trump's personal spiritual life. Then I'll say, let's pray for these appointments. Then let's pray for our education. Let's pray for the House and the Senate. Let's pray for our military. Let's pray for these men and these women that have now been given this great responsibility. Let's pray for these new governors. And 40 minutes goes real quickly.
Yes.
It really does.
Well, and you talked about the Layman's Prayer Revival. I've read J. Edwin Orr, and you have as well.
Yes.
Telling the story about, I'll just tell one in the interest of time, I'll take another phone call. This individual was getting some goods, and he actually came down the Hudson River from Albany, and he's in New York City, and he's trying to get all these goods from the shopkeeper, and then the guy looks at the clock and says, okay, it's noon. He said, well, what does that mean? He says, well, we're all going to prayer. He said, no, I need to get back up to Albany. He says, I'm sorry, we're going to pray for the hour from noon to 1.
Yes.
So he reluctantly goes to the prayer meeting. He becomes a Christian, and then he gets back to Albany and starts another one of those prayer revivals in Albany, New York. And
really?
So you have story after story. Another one I remember of an individual that was bringing, he was one of the harbor keepers, bringing one of the ships into New York City. And he was telling all the individuals about the fact that they were going, when they get there, if they get there at noon, there's nothing will happen in New York City because everybody's praying. And so he then shares the gospel with them, and before they even dock, many of them become Christians and get involved in the prayer revival. So there were all sorts of really exciting stories.
Yes, there were stories of ships at sea that would come back, and enormous of them be converted simply by the scuttlebutt of being talked about what God was doing. The book of Joel says, call off your honeymoon, come out of the bridal chamber. Now that's commitment right there. You call off your honeymoon and come to pray.
Yeah. Let's take another phone call real quickly. We'll head to South Carolina and WAGP. Dennis, thank you for calling today.
Hi, well, thank you for taking my call. I said to the girl answering the phone that I don't hear anything about education being talked about as something that needs reform. We've had this humanist education system that's breeding all this liberal ideology that we have to deal with. And as soon as I got on the phone, I heard him talking about praying for education.
Sure. Well, and again, your point's well taken, because that's one of the things we have talked about. We've talked about Common Core. We've talked about the need, and I think we should pray for our teachers too. You know, we talk about praying for those in authority, but those in the public schools, it can be a public witness. We talked today about this poor woman, Deidre Shannon, that just puts up Charlie Brown Christmas, and they tell her to take it down. Now the Attorney General say, no, you're going to have to put it back up. So we need to pray for what's happening there and recognize that we have imbibed deeply into this humanistic worldview, haven't we?
Yes. If we merely had a taking off of the gloves on Christians and say, Christian teachers, you can speak out on the very real possibility of an infinite personal God who has spoken and has given his word. You know, I remember when I was in high school, Kerby, we had a teacher named Miss Maxwell that looked at all of us cocky kids from 1968. All right. And we were a pretty talented bunch there at Waco Richfield High School. And this teacher, she just looked at us and she said, let me ask you a question. Who is Abraham? And it was dead silent. And she turned to the chief school hellraiser and asked Mike over here, who was he? And he took a wild guess. He said, well, he was a prophet. And of course, that's true. He is a prophet. And she said, yeah, that's true. What else do you know about him? And we were silent. And Miss Maxwell let us know that other than Jesus Christ, this is maybe right there with Moses, the most important human being in biblical history. And you don't have a clue on him. But that teacher had the freedom to do that.
Well, again, we just want to pray for this nation, pray for those of you that are teachers, and most importantly, pray for the pastors. And Pastor Tommy Nelson, always great to have you in studio.
Thank you, Kerby.
Let's do this again. Let's again encourage you to go to the website. You're going to find out more about what they're doing with their 100 Days of Prayer, and I want you to replicate that in your community. And let me also mention, as you go to the website, that we are just, again, challenging you to give to this ministry between now and the end of the year, and our matching fund now up to $70,000. So anything that you can do to help us financially, we would greatly appreciate it. All of it on the website, pointofview.net. We'll say goodbye for today and want to thank Andrew and Catherine and Shamila for their help. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
Opportunity. Sometimes you get one chance to make a difference. Not long ago, many of us feared what might happen if the election turned out differently. Would religious liberty survive? And even though Donald Trump has promised to appoint judges and establish policies to protect our freedoms, now is not the time to sit back. Now is the time to press forward and educate people and engage our leaders to defend liberty and change the culture. Today, you can seize an opportunity by giving to Point of View. We have a matching gift that doubles your investment up to $20,000. I'm looking for at least one person who will step up with $5,000 or more, and others to chip in $25, $50, $100, gifts that will be doubled and help us meet this opportunity. Click the banner at pointofview.net and be the light in your community. Or call 800-347-5151 or mail your donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Seize this opportunity and be the light. Pointofview.net. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.